They say that on certain nights, when the moon is full and the forest holds its breath, you can still hear them, the voices that changed the course of history. Ancient whispers that drifted through the trees centuries ago, carrying secrets that would unite warring nations and plant the seeds of the Great Peace. But here's what they don't tell you in the legends. The man who heard those voices first, he almost didn't listen. His name was Hiawatha, and on the night that would transform not just his own destiny, but the fate of countless generations, he was ready to give up. The weight of his people's endless conflicts had crushed his spirit. The council spoke only of vengeance. The young warriors sharpened their blades of battles that would solve nothing. And he had run out of words, out of hope, out of reason to believe that peace was even possible. So he walked into the forest that night not seeking wisdom, but seeking silence, a place where he wouldn't have to pretend to have answers he didn't possess, where he could finally admit that he was just one man, powerless against the tide of hatred that seemed to sweep everything before it. But the forest had other plans for Hiawatha, and what happened next in those moonlit woods would echo through the ages, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with a simple act of listening to voices we never expected to hear. What were those voices? Where did they come from? And why did they choose that particular man, on that particular night, to receive a message that would change everything? Let me tell you the story they whisper in the sacred groves, the story of the night Hiawatha heard voices in the forest, and discovered that some calls from the beyond are impossible to ignore. The forest knew him. Every tree, every stone, every shadow seemed to whisper his name as Hiawatha walked deeper into the woodland sanctuary he had known since childhood. But tonight, even this sacred place felt different, charged with an energy that made the very air seem to shimmer with possibility. His footsteps were the only sound breaking the profound stillness. Not even the night birds called out their usual songs. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. Hiawatha paused beside a massive oak, its bark scarred and weathered by countless seasons. He placed his palm against its rough surface, feeling the slow, ancient pulse of life within. This tree had been old when his grandfather's grandfather was young. What wisdom did it hold? What secrets had it witnessed? For weeks now, he had carried a burden that grew heavier with each passing day. His people looked to him for guidance, for answers to questions that seemed to have no solutions. Conflict brewed between the tribes like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Trust had been broken. Words had been spoken that could not be taken back. And he felt lost in the vastness of it all. The wind stirred the leaves above him, creating a sound like whispered prayers. Or was it something more? Hiawatha tilted his head, listening. There it was again, not quite a voice, not quite the wind. Something that seemed to call his name from the very depths of the earth itself. He continued walking, his feet finding their way along paths worn smooth by generations of his people. The moon, full and silver, cast everything in ethereal light, transforming the familiar forest into a landscape of dreams and shadows. Fireflies began their ancient dance, tiny stars fallen to earth, blinking in and out of existence like thoughts half-remembered. As he walked, memories rose unbidden in his mind. His mother's voice, soft and loving, singing him to sleep with lullabies that spoke of unity and peace. His father's strong hands, teaching him to shape arrowheads and to see the sacred in the ordinary. The elders, their voices weaving stories around the fire, tales of heroes and spirits, of times when the world was in balance. But that balance seemed so fragile now, so easily broken. How could one man, even one with a name like Hiawatha, hope to mend what had been torn apart? The path began to descend, leading him toward a grove he remembered from his youth. It was a place his grandmother had called sacred, where the veil between worlds was thinnest. She had told him stories of voices that spoke there, voices of the ancestors, of the spirits who watched over the people. He had never heard them before. But tonight felt different. The grove opened before him like a natural cathedral, its canopy of interwoven branches forming a dome above, with gaps that allowed moonlight to stream through in silver columns. In the center grew a circle of ancient birch trees, their white bark glowing with an almost supernatural luminescence. Hiawatha stood at the edge of this sacred space, feeling suddenly small, suddenly aware that he was in the presence of something far greater than himself. The air here was different, thicker somehow, filled with the weight of countless prayers, countless ceremonies, countless seekers who had come before him. He moved forward slowly, reverently, until he reached the center of the circle. There, he knelt upon the soft earth, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes closed, his breathing deep and even. At first, there was only silence, the deep, profound silence that exists in the heart of all sacred places. But gradually, so gradually that he almost missed it, something began to change. The quality of the silence itself seemed to shift, to deepen, to become pregnant with possibility. And then he heard it, a voice, soft as breath, ancient as stone, speaking not to his ears, but directly to his soul. Hiawatha! His eyes opened, but he saw no one. Only the moonlit grove, the silver birches standing like sentinels, the fireflies weaving their patterns of light through the air. Hiawatha, child of the people, why do you carry such weight upon your shoulders? The voice was neither male nor female, neither old nor young. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the earth beneath him and the sky above, from the very atoms of air that filled his lungs. His heart began to race, but not with fear, with something else entirely. Recognition, perhaps, or hope. Who? Who speaks to me? He whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. We are the voices of those who came before. We are the keepers of wisdom, the guardians of the sacred ways. We have been waiting for you, Hiawatha, waiting for you to be ready to hear us. The grove seemed to pulse with gentle energy, as if the very trees were breathing in rhythm with his heart. The fireflies' dance grew more intricate, more purposeful, as if they too were part of this mysterious communion. I don't understand, Hiawatha said, his voice stronger now. I have tried to listen, to find the path forward for my people. But there is so much anger, so much division. I fear I am not wise enough, not strong enough to heal what has been broken. A different voice now, warmer, with the cadence of a loving grandmother. Oh, my child, strength is not in forcing the river to change its course. Wisdom is not in having all the answers. True power lies in becoming the bridge over troubled waters, in being the calm center around which others can find their balance. Tears began to flow down Hiawatha's cheeks, though he could not say why. There was something in these voices that touched a place so deep within him that he had forgotten it existed, a place of pure knowing, a connection to something vast and eternal. But how? He asked. How does one become such a bridge? Another voice, this one carrying the strength of mountains and the patience of stones. First, you must heal the division within yourself. You carry the conflict of your people in your own heart. You cannot give peace to others while war rages within your own spirit. The truth of these words struck him like lightning. Yes, he realized he did carry their conflicts within himself. Part of him sided with one tribe, part with another. Part of him wanted to fight, part wanted to flee. He was a battlefield disguised as a peacemaker. Show me, he whispered. Show me how to find this peace. The voices fell silent, but the grove itself seemed to respond to his plea. The very air began to shimmer, as if he were looking at the world through water. The moonlight grew brighter, more focused, until it seemed to create a pathway of silver light that led deeper into forest. Without hesitation, Hiawatha rose and followed this ethereal path. His feet moved of their own accord, guided by something beyond conscious thought. The trees seemed to pop before him, creating a corridor through the woods that he had never seen before, though he had walked these forests all his life. As he walked, the landscape around him began to change. Not physically, but in some deeper way. Colors became more vivid, more alive. The leaves of the trees pulsed with inner light. The very ground beneath his feet seemed to glow with soft, warm radiance. And then, in a clearing ahead, he saw them. Figures of light, translucent as morning mist, but somehow more real than anything he had ever seen. They stood in a great circle, their faces serene, their eyes filled with compassion that spanned generations. Some wore the clothing of his own people, others dressed in style from tribes he recognized, and still others in garments unlike anything he had ever seen. They were the ancestors, the keepers of wisdom, the ones who had walked this path before him, and now waited to guide him on his journey. One figure stepped forward, and Hiawatha's breath caught in his throat. He recognized the face, though he had never seen it in life. It was his great-great-grandmother, the one whose stories had been passed down through generations, the woman who was said to have brought peace to warring clans through the power of her words and the depth of her compassion. "Welcome, my child," she said, her voice like honey mixed with starlight. "You have come to the place where all paths converge. Hey, you will learn the great secret that has been forgotten by so many." "What secret?" Hiawatha asked, his voice filled with wonder. She smiled, and in that smile was the warmth of every hearth fire, the comfort of every mother's lullaby, the safety of every home. That we are all one people, that the divisions we create, the boundaries we draw, the conflict we nurture, they exist only in the mind. In the realm of spirit, in the place of true knowing, there is only unity, only love, only peace. As she spoke, the circle of ancestors began to move, creating a dance as old as time itself. And as they danced, Hiawatha began to see visions, images that flowed through his consciousness like a river of light. He saw the land as it truly was, not as divided territories belonging to different tribes, but as one living entity, breathing, growing, nurturing all who dwelt upon it. He saw the people not as separate nations in conflict, but as members of one great family, each with their own gifts, their own wisdom to contribute to the whole. He saw himself not as a man caught between opposing forces, but as a weaver, one whose purpose was to take the different threads of human experience and create from them a tapestry of unity and strength. The vision expanded, showing him scenes from a possible future, a great council, where representatives from all the tribes would gather not in anger or suspicion, but in mutual respect and shared purpose. Laws that would govern not through force, but through wisdom and consensus. Peace that would last not just for years, but for generations. Is this possible?" he whispered. His great-great-grandmother nodded. "Everything you have seen already exists in the realm of possibility. But possibility must be made manifest through action, through courage, through the willingness to see with the eyes of spirit rather than the eyes of fear." The dance of the ancestors slowed, and they began to form smaller circles, inviting Hiawatha to move among them. Each one had something to teach him, some piece of wisdom to share. An ancient warrior, his face marked with the scars of many battles, spoke of true strength. "The greatest victory is not won with weapons, my son, but with understanding. The mightiest warrior is one who can transform an enemy into a friend without raising a hand in anger." A wise woman, her silver hair adorned with feathers and beads, taught him about the power of words. Language is a bridge between souls. Choose your words as carefully as you would choose arrows for your bow, for they can heal or wound, unite or divide, build up or tear down. A young brave, barely older than Hiawatha himself, shared the secret of leadership. A true leader does not stand above his people, commanding from on high. He stands among them, listening to their hearts, understanding their fears, sharing their dreams. He leads not by force, but by example. One by one, they share their knowledge, their experience, their love. And with each teaching, Hiawatha felt something within himself changing, expanding, growing stronger. The weight he had carried for so long was transforming, becoming not a burden but a sacred responsibility. But there was one figure who had not yet spoken. An elderly man who stood slightly apart from the others, his presence both gentle and commanding. When their eyes met, Hiawatha felt a recognition so deep it took his breath away. This was a peacemaker, the one whose name was spoken only in whispers, whose teachings had been passed down through generations, whose very existence had become the stuff of legend. The peacemaker stepped forward, and as he did, the entire grove seemed to hold its breath. "Hiawatha," he said, his voice carrying the authority of mountains and the gentleness of rain. "You have been chosen for great work, not chosen by me or by any earthly power, but chosen by the very forces that govern the universe. You are to be the voice of unity, the bridge between worlds, the one who will plant the seeds of the great peace." "But I am just one man," Hiawatha protested. "How can one person change the hearts of so many?" The peacemaker smiled. "Every great tree begins as a single seed. Every mighty river begins as a single drop of rain. Every age of peace begins with one person willing to speak the truth, even when that truth is difficult to hear." He gestured, and in the air before them appeared images of what was to come. Hiawatha saw himself speaking to councils of warriors, his words gradually melting their anger. He saw former enemies embracing as brothers. He saw the great tree of peace being planted, its roots growing deep, its branches spreading wide, offering shelter to all peoples. "This is your destiny," the peacemaker continued. "But destiny is not fate. It is possibility. You have the choice to accept this calling or to turn away. No one will judge you for whatever you decide." Hiawatha looked around the circle of ancestors, seeing in their faces the hopes and dreams of generations. He thought of his people, divided and hurting. He thought of the children yet to be born, who would inherit either conflict or peace based on the choices made today. "If I accept this calling," he asked, "will I have your guidance? Will the voices that have spoken to me tonight continue to speak?" "We are always with you," his great-great-grandmother replied. "In the whisper of wind through leaves, in the song of water over stones, in the silence between heartbeats. Listen with your heart, and you will hear us." Dear listener, we pause here in our tale as Hiawatha stands on the threshold of his great calling. If this story is helping you unwind, if these ancient voices are bringing peace to your own spirit, consider subscribing to Drowsy Historian, your home for sacred tales that bridge the gap between wisdom and sleep. We gather here each night to share stories that our souls need to hear, tales that remind us of the deeper truths that transcend time and culture. Join our community of peaceful dreamers, and let these ancient voices guide you into restorative sleep. Now, let us return to that sacred grove, where a choice that would echo through centuries was about to be made. The grove grew quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was a silence of a moment balanced on the edge of eternity, where a single decision could reshape the world. Hiawatha closed his eyes and looked deep within himself. He felt the conflict that had torn at his heart, the doubts that had plagued his mind, the fears that had held him back. But beneath all of that, deeper than all of that, he found something else. Love. Pure, unconditional love for his people, for all people, for the very earth beneath his feet and the sky above his head. When he opened his eyes, his decision was clear. "I accept," he said simply. "I accept this calling, this responsibility, this sacred trust. I will be your voice in the world of the living. I will speak the words of peace, even when they are difficult to hear. I will plant the seeds of the great peace, even if I do not live to see the full harvest." The ancestors began to sing. It was a song without words, a melody that seemed to rise from the very heart of creation itself. And as they sang, light began to gather around Hiawatha, not the harsh light of the sun, but the gentle, nurturing light of dawn, of hope, of new beginnings. The light entered him, filling every cell of his body, every corner of his soul. He felt himself changing, transforming, becoming something more than he had been before. Not superhuman, but fully human. Not perfect, but complete. Not without fear, but no longer controlled by it. When the light faded and the song ended, the peacemaker stepped forward one last time. "You are ready now," he said. "But remember this above all else. The power you carry is not your own. It belongs to the people, to the earth, to the great web of life that connects all things. Use it wisely, use it humbly, and use it always in service of the greater good." One by one, the ancestors began to fade, returning to whatever realm they had come from. But before they disappeared completely, each one touched Hiawatha's heart, leaving there a gift of wisdom, strength, or compassion. His great-great-grandmother was the last to go. She cupped his face in her translucent hands and smiled with infinite tenderness. "Remember, my child, that love is the only force in the universe strong enough to heal all wounds, bridge all divides, and create lasting peace. Trust in love, even when hatred seems stronger, especially then." And then she too was gone, leaving Hiawatha alone in the grove. But not truly alone. He could feel their presence still, a warm glow in his heart, a whisper of encouragement in his mind. The path back through the forest was different now. The same trees, the same stones, the same moonlit clearings, but everything was transformed by the new eyes through which Hiawatha saw the world. He walked slowly, savoring each step, each breath, each moment of this sacred night. The burden he had carried for so long was gone, replaced by something far more precious: purpose. Not the driven, anxious purpose that exhausts the soul, but the quiet, steady purpose that gives life meaning. As he walked, he began to understand how the transformation within him would manifest in the world. He would return to his people with new words, new ideas, new ways of seeing old problems. Some would listen eagerly, hungry for the message of peace he brought. Others would resist, clinging to old grudges and familiar patterns of conflict. But that was all right. The peacemaker had shown him that change comes slowly, like the turning of seasons, like the growth of mighty trees. What mattered was planting the seeds, trusting in their power to grow, and tending them with patience and faith. He thought of the first council he would call, how he would invite representatives from all the tribes to come together not as enemies, but as members of one great family seeking a better way forward. He thought of the words he would speak, not his own words, but the ancient words of wisdom that had been entrusted to him. The edge of the forest came into view, and beyond it, the sleeping village where his own people rested. Soon, the sun would rise on a new day, and where it would begin the great work of his life. But for now, in these last precious moments of solitude, he allowed himself to simply be grateful. Grateful for the voices that had called to him from the depths of the forest. Grateful for the ancestors who had shared their wisdom. Grateful for the choice he had been given, and for the strength to make it. Grateful for the love that had transformed his heart and would, through him, touch the hearts of countless others. As he reached the final bend in the path, Hiawatha paused and looked back one last time at the forest that had changed his life forever. It looked like any other woodland now, peaceful and ordinary in the moonlight, but he knew that appearances could be deceiving. Sacred spaces existed not in the physical world alone, but in the realm of the heart, where the most important transformations always took place. "Thank you," he whispered to the trees, to the spirits, to the great mystery that had orchestrated this miraculous night. "Thank you for showing me who I am meant to be." The village was just beginning to stir as Hiawatha emerged from the forest. Smoke was rising from a few lodges where early risers were kindling their morning fires. A dog barked once, then settled back into contented silence. Children would soon wake and run laughing through the pathways between homes, their voices bright with the joy of a new day. But this was not just any new day. This was the dawn of something greater, something that would echo through the generations like ripples spreading across still water. Hiawatha made his way to his own lodge, but he did not go inside immediately. Instead, he sat on a fallen log beside his doorway and watched as the world awakened around him. A cardinal called from somewhere nearby, its song clear and strong in the morning air. A rabbit ventured into the clearing, saw him, and continued about its business unafraid. Everything was exactly as it had been the night before, yet everything was different. The difference was not in the world, but in the eyes that saw it, the heart that felt it, the spirit that understood its deeper meaning. His neighbor, Running Bear, emerged from his lodge and noticed Hiawatha sitting in contemplation. "You're up early, my friend," Running Bear called softly. "Or perhaps you never went to sleep." Hiawatha smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Running Bear pause and look more closely. "I have been learning," Hiawatha replied. "Learning things that can only be taught in the deep places, by voices that speak only to those who are ready to hear." Running Bear approached and sat beside him on the log. They had been friends since childhood, and he knew when Hiawatha had something important to share. "What kind of learning?" he asked. Hiawatha was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. How could he explain what had happened to him? How could he describe the indescribable, put into human language truths that transcended all language? "I have learned," he said finally, "that peace is not something that happens to us. It is something we create, moment by moment, choice by choice, heart by heart. And I have learned that I have been called to help our people remember this truth." Running Bear nodded slowly. He had seen the weight his friend had been carrying, had worried about the sadness in his eyes. But now, in the growing light of dawn, he saw something else there. Hope, purpose, a deep, abiding peace that seemed to radiate outward like warmth from a fire. "The councils have been hostile," Running Bear said carefully. "The chiefs speak only of old grievances and future battles. How will you convince them to listen to words of peace?" Hiawatha stood and stretched, feeling the morning sun warm his face. The voices of the ancestors whispered encouragement in his heart. "I will not convince them," he said. "I will simply speak the truth as it was given to me. Some will hear it and understand. Others will resist, but the seeds will be planted in their hearts nonetheless. And in time, when they are ready, those seeds will grow." 3 days later, Hiawatha sent runners to all the neighboring tribes, inviting their leaders to a great council. Not a war council, as had been called so many times before, but a peace council, a gathering to seek a new way forward. The response was mixed. Some chiefs agreed to come out of curiosity, others out of respect for Hiawatha's reputation. A few refused outright, declaring that they had no interest in words when actions were what mattered. But enough agreed to make the council possible, and that was all Hiawatha needed. On the appointed day, they gathered in the great clearing beside the lake, the same place where councils had been held for generations. But the atmosphere was different this time. Instead of warriors arranged in hostile formations, the representatives sat in a great circle, symbolizing equality and unity. Hiawatha had spent the intervening days in preparation, fasting and praying, listening for the voices that had called to him in the forest. They had not failed him. In quiet moments, when his mind was still and his heart was open, he could hear their whispered guidance, feel their presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. The council began at sunrise, as was traditional. One by one, the chiefs stood and spoke their grievances, their anger, their demands for justice. Hiawatha listened to each one with deep attention, acknowledging their pain, honoring their concerns. He did not argue or contradict. He simply received their words with compassion and understanding. When the last chief had spoken, Hiawatha rose. The clearing fell silent, and in that silence he could feel the presence of the ancestors, the wisdom keepers, the voices that had changed his life. "My brothers," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the gathering, "I have heard your words, and I have felt the pain behind them. You speak of wrongs that must be righted, of honor that must be defended, of justice that must be served. These are not small matters. They are the cries of wounded hearts, and they deserve to be heard." He paused, allowing his words to settle. But I ask you this, if we continue on the path we have always walked, where will it lead us? If we answer injury with injury, wrong with wrong, will our children inherit peace? Or will they inherit only a legacy of endless conflict? An older chief, Broken Arrow, stood up. His face was scarred from many battles, and his eyes were hard with years of anger. "You speak pretty words, Hiawatha," he said, "but words don't bring back the dead. Words don't heal the wounds that have been inflicted on my people. What would you have us do? Forget? Forgive? Let those who have wronged us go unpunished." Hiawatha met his gaze steadily, and when he spoke, there was no anger in his voice, only deep compassion. "I would not ask you to forget, my brother. Our memories of pain are sacred teachers, showing us how not to treat others. But I would ask you to consider this. What if there was a way to honor the dead not through revenge, but through creating the peace they died hoping to find? What if forgiveness was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all?" What happened next was something that those present would remember for the rest of their lives. As Hiawatha continued to speak, sharing the wisdom he had received in the forest, the very air around the council seemed to change. He told them of the vision he had seen, of all the tribes united under one great tree of peace. He spoke of laws that would govern not through force but through wisdom, of conflicts resolved through discussion rather than warfare, of a confederation that would be strong precisely because it chose cooperation over competition. But it was not just his words that moved them. It was something deeper, something that seemed to flow from him like light from the sun. The same love that had filled him in the sacred grove now touched the hearts of those who listened, softening anger, melting hatred, opening minds that had been closed for years. One by one, the chiefs began to lean forward, their hostility giving way to curiosity, their suspicion replaced by hope. Even Broken Arrow, the most resistant among them, found himself listening with growing interest. Hiawatha spoke of the great law of peace that would bind the nations together, not as subjects of a conqueror, but as equal partners in a sacred covenant. He described how decisions would be made through careful deliberation, with the voices of all people, including women and children, being heard and honored. He told them of the tree of peace that would be planted to symbolize their unity, its 4 great roots stretching in all directions, offering shelter to any nation that chose to follow the path of peace. Under its branches, warriors would bury their weapons, transforming implements of war into symbols of their commitment to a better way. As the day wore on, something miraculous began to happen. Chiefs who had been enemies for decades found themselves sitting together, sharing food, discussing not how to defeat each other, but how to build something greater than any of them could achieve alone. When the sun began to set on that first day of the council, Broken Arrow stood once more. But this time, his voice was different, softer, touched by wonder. "Hiawatha," he said, "I came here expecting to hear the same old arguments, the same impossible dreams of peace. But what you have shared with us, it is not a dream. It is a vision of what could be if we have the courage to make it real." He looked around the circle at his fellow chiefs, many of whom were nodding in agreement. "I have spent my life preparing for war," Broken Arrow continued. "But what if we spent our energy preparing for peace instead? What if we taught our young people not just how to fight, but how to build, how to heal, how to bridge the spaces between different hearts?" The council continued for 7 days, and by its end, something unprecedented had been accomplished. Not just an agreement between tribes, but a transformation of understanding. The representatives returned to their peoples not as the same men who had left, but as carriers of a new vision, ambassadors of hope. But the real work was just beginning. Over the following months, Hiawatha traveled from village to village, sharing the message of the Great Peace. Everywhere he went, the same miracle occurred. Hearts that had been hardened by years of conflict began to soften. People who had seen only enemies began to see potential friends. It was not always easy. There were those who resisted, who clung to old ways and ancient grudges. There were moments when Hiawatha himself doubted, when the magnitude of the task seemed overwhelming. But in those dark moments, he would find a quiet place and listen for the voices that had first called to him in the forest. And they were always there, whispering encouragement, reminding him of the vision he had seen. The day came when representatives from all the willing tribes gathered for the great ceremony that would mark the formal beginning of their confederation. They met in a place that would become sacred to all their peoples, a hilltop overlooking a vast valley where the tree of peace would be planted. The tree itself was magnificent, a great white pine that had grown for many years in a grove sacred to Hiawatha's people. Its roots ran deep, its trunk was strong, and its branches reached high into the sky like arms embracing the world. As the ceremony began, warriors from each tribe came forward carrying their weapons of war. Bows, arrows, war clubs, tomahawks, all the implements they had used in their conflict with one another. One by one, they placed these weapons in a great pit that had been dug beneath where the tree would stand. When the last weapon had been placed in the pit, Hiawatha stepped forward. In his hands he held a handful of earth from his own village, and he invited each of the other representatives to do the same. "Let this tree grow from the soil of all our lands," he said. "Let its roots draw nourishment from the weapons we have buried, transforming the tools of war into the foundation of peace. Let its branches provide shelter for all who seek refuge from the storms of conflict." Together, they planted the tree of peace, each person adding their handful of earth to the base of its roots. And as they worked, they sang, not war songs, but songs of unity, songs of hope, songs of a future where their children would know peace. When the ceremony was complete, they stood in a great circle around the newly planted tree. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and in that light, the tree seemed to glow with an inner radiance. Hiawatha looked around the circle at the faces gathered there, faces that had once been marked by suspicion and hatred, now softened by hope and love. The voices in the forest had spoken truly. The vision was becoming reality. The influence of the Great Peace spread like ripples on still water, touching communities far beyond those who had been present at the original council. Word traveled through the intricate network of trade routes and family connections that linked tribes across the vast continent. Travelers carried stories of a confederation where former enemies now sat together in council, where disputes were settled with words rather than weapons, where children played together regardless of which tribe they belonged to. In the months and years that followed the planting of the Tree of Peace, Hiawatha continued his journeys, but now he was not alone. Other voices joined his, chiefs and clan mothers, warriors transformed into peacemakers, young people who had grown up hearing the stories and wanted to carry them forward. Each village they visited, each council they addressed, each individual heart they touched became another center from which the message of peace could spread. It was exactly as the ancestors had shown him in his vision. One person speaking truth could indeed change a world, but only if that truth was planted in soil made fertile by love and tended with patience. There was Gentle Rain, a clan mother from the Wolf people, who took the message of the Great Peace to the women's councils of her nation. She spoke of how the feminine wisdom of nurturing and protecting could be applied not just to families, but to entire communities, entire nations. Under her guidance, the women's voices became a powerful force for reconciliation, their natural instinct to preserve life overcoming the masculine tendency toward conflict. There was Swift River, a young warrior who had lost his father in a raid but chose forgiveness over revenge. He became a teacher, showing other young people that true courage lay not in the ability to take life, but in the willingness to preserve and protect it. His transformation was so complete, so inspiring, that many who heard his story were moved to examine their own hearts. There was Grey Wolf, an elder whose memory stretched back through decades of tribal history. He became the keeper of the new stories, weaving the tale of the Great Peace into the traditional narratives, ensuring that future generations would understand how their ancestors had chosen wisdom over warfare, unity over division. But perhaps the most profound changes were happening in the smallest, most intimate moments. Children who had grown up expecting to inherit their parents' enemies were instead learning to see all people as potential friends. Young couples were choosing to build their families in communities that celebrated diversity rather than fearing it. Elders were sharing stories of healing rather than tales of vengeance. The very language was changing. Words that had once carried only concepts of war and separation were being joined by new vocabularies of peace and connection. Ceremonies that had focused on preparing for battle were being transformed or replaced by rituals that celebrated cooperation and mutual support. As the Great Peace took root and flourished, Hiawatha found his role evolving once again. No longer was he primarily a messenger carrying new ideas to unreceptive audiences. Now he was a wisdom keeper, a teacher of teachers, a gardener tending the growing forest of peace that had sprung from the single tree planted on that sacred hill. He established schools of a sort, not buildings with walls and rigid curricula, but living circles of learning where the principles of the Great Peace could be studied, discussed, and applied to the ever-changing challenges of human community. These circles met in natural settings that encouraged contemplation and connection with the deeper rhythms of life. Under ancient oaks or beside flowing streams, in meadows where wildflowers bloomed or on hilltops where the skies seemed to stretch forever, people gathered to explore what it meant to live in harmony with one another and with the natural world. The curriculum, if it could be called that, was both simple and profound. Students learned to listen, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. They practiced seeing through the eyes of others, understanding how the same event could be experienced differently depending on one's perspective. They studied the art of speaking truth without causing harm, of standing firm in their principles while remaining open to new understanding. Most importantly, they learned to recognize the voice of wisdom within themselves, the same inner guidance that had first called a Hiawatha in the forest. For the ancestors had made it clear that every person carried within them the capacity to hear the deeper truths, to connect with the sacred source of all peace and healing. One day, as Hiawatha sat with a group of these students beside a quiet lake, a young woman named Singing Bird asked him a question that would stay with him for the rest of his life. "Teacher," she said, "you have shown us how to create peace between tribes, between communities, between nations. But what about the war that still rages within our own hearts? How do we make peace with the parts of ourselves that we don't like, the voices in our heads that tell us we're not good enough, strong enough, wise enough?" Hiawatha smiled, remembering his own struggles with self-doubt and inner conflict. This was perhaps the most important teaching of all, the foundation upon which all other peace must be built. "My daughter," he said gently, "you have asked the essential question. For how can we give to others what we do not possess ourselves? The same principles that govern peace between peoples also govern peace within the individual heart." He gestured toward the lake, its surface disturbed by a gentle breeze. "See how the water is moved by the wind, creating waves and ripples that distort the reflection of the sky? This is like the mind disturbed by judgment, fear, and self-criticism. But watch what happens when the wind dies down." They waited in silence as a breeze stilled and the water became calm. Soon, the surface was like a perfect mirror, reflecting the clouds and sky with crystal clarity. "This is the mind at peace," Hiawatha continued. "Not empty, not without thought or feeling, but no longer at war with itself. When we stop fighting our own nature, when we accept ourselves with the same compassion we would show a beloved friend, then the wisdom that dwells within us can be clearly heard." Years passed, and the Great Peace continued to grow and strengthen. The Confederation that had begun with a handful of tribes now included dozens, each contributing their unique gift while maintaining their distinct identities. Trade flourished where once there had been only warfare. Children grew up bilingual not out of necessity but out of curiosity, eager to learn the languages and customs of their neighbors. But as Hiawatha entered the later years of his life, he felt called once again to return to the place where his great journey had begun. The sacred grove in the forest, where the voices of the ancestors had first spoken to him, was calling him home. He went alone this time, as he had that first night so many years ago. But he was not the same man who had entered these woods carrying the weight of his people's conflicts. He walked now with the steady step of one who had found his purpose and fulfilled it, whose life had become a bridge between the world of spirit and the world of human action. The grove looked exactly the same. The circle of white birches still glowing in the moonlight, the fireflies still dancing their ancient patterns through the air. But Hiawatha could feel the difference. The peace he had helped create in the outer world had somehow transformed this sacred space as well, filling it with a deeper serenity, a more profound sense of completion. He knelt in the center of the circle, just as he had so many years before, and closed his eyes. At first, there was only the familiar silence of sacred places. But gradually, he began to sense a presence, gentle and welcoming. "Welcome home, my son." It was the voice of his great-great-grandmother, as warm and loving as he remembered. "I have done as you asked," he said softly. "I have planted the seeds of peace, tended them as they grew, watched them flourish and spread. The great Lord governs the people now, and the tree of peace offers shelter to all who seek it." "You have done more than we dared hope," came another voice, the peacemaker himself. "The ripples of your work will continue to spread long after your time in the physical world has ended. But tell us, what have you learned? What wisdom have you gained that you would share with those who come after?" Hiawatha was quiet for a long time, considering the question. What had he learned in his years of service? What truth had emerged from the crucible of experience? Finally, he spoke. "I have learned that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of love. I have learned that every human heart, no matter how hardened by pain or poisoned by anger, contains a seed of compassion waiting to sprout. I have learned that the most powerful force in the universe is not the lightning that splits a tree or the earthquake that moves mountains, but the gentle voice of truth spoken with love." He paused, then continued. "But most of all, I have learned that we are never alone. The wisdom we need, the strength we require, the love that can heal any wound, all of these exist within us, waiting to be discovered. We need only be still enough to listen, humble enough to receive, and brave enough to act on what we hear." "These are good teachings," his great-great-grandmother said. "They will serve the people well in times to come. But now, my child, what of you? You have given your life in service to others. What do you need for yourself?" Hiawatha smiled at the question, feeling the deep contentment that comes to those who have lived their purpose fully. "I need nothing that I do not already possess," he said. "I have known the joy of seeing enemies become friends, the satisfaction of watching seeds of peace grow into mighty trees of justice and compassion. I have heard the laughter of children who will never know the wars their grandparents fought. What more could any soul desire?" But even as he spoke these words, he felt something stirring within him, not a need exactly, but a longing, a desire to understand the greater pattern of which his life had been just one thread. As if reading his thoughts, the peacemaker spoke. "You wonder about the larger design, the cosmic purpose that guided your steps and shaped your choices. This, too, is part of your teaching, for others will ask the same questions." The grove began to fill with a soft, golden light, and in that light, Hiawatha began to see visions that took his breath away. He saw the web of connection that linked all living things, the invisible threads of love and compassion that bound every heart to every other heart. He saw how his own actions had strengthened some of those threads, how the peace he had helped create had sent waves of healing energy throughout the entire web. But more than that, he saw how his story was just one note in a vast symphony of peace that stretched across time and space. Before him, there had been other peacemakers, other bridge builders, other voices calling humanity toward its highest potential. After him, there would be others still, each building on the foundation laid by those who came before. Every act of love, every word of truth, every gesture of compassion adds to the great song, the peacemaker explained. Your note was beautiful and strong, and it will echo through eternity. But it is not the only note, nor is it meant to be. The symphony requires many voices, many instruments, many melodies woven together in harmony. Hiawatha felt tears of joy flowing down his cheeks as he understood. His life had not been an isolated event, but part of something magnificent and eternal. The loneliness he had sometimes felt, the sense of carrying an impossible burden, had been illusions. He had never been alone. He had always been part of the great chorus of souls working to heal the world. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for showing me the truth, for calling me to save, for never abandoning me even when the path seemed unclear." "The gratitude belongs to us," his great-great-grandmother replied. "You answered the call when many would have turned away. You spoke truth when lies would have been easier. You chose love when fear would have been safer. Through you, the ancient wisdom found new expression, and the eternal flame of peace was kindled in thousands of hearts." As the night deepened around the sacred grove, Hiawatha felt a profound sense of completion settling over him like a soft blanket. The urgent energy that had driven him for so many years was gently transforming into something else, a deep, abiding peace that asked nothing, demanded nothing, simply existed in perfect harmony with itself. The voices of the ancestors grew softer now, not because they were leaving, but because their message had been fully received, fully integrated into the fabric of his being. They had become part of him, just as he had become part of the eternal stream of wisdom that flowed through all awakened souls. "Sleep now, my son," his great-great-grandmother whispered, her voice like wind through summer grass. "Sleep in the knowledge that your work is complete, your purpose fulfilled. The seeds you planted will continue to grow, tended by other hands, nourished by other hearts, until the whole earth blooms with the flowers of peace." Hiawatha lay back on the soft earth of the grove, looking up through the canopy of leaves to the stars beyond. Each point of light seemed to pulse with love, and he realized that he was seeing the cosmos as it truly was, not a cold, empty void, but a vast ocean of consciousness, teeming with life, intelligence, and boundless compassion. His breathing slowed, becoming as gentle and rhythmic as a tide. With each exhale, he released another layer of earthly concern. With each inhale, he drew in more of the universal peace that surrounded and filled him. In his final moments of ordinary consciousness, Hiawatha heard something that filled his heart with inexpressible joy. From villages scattered across the continent, from people he had touched directly and indirectly, came the sound of voices singing. Not literally, perhaps, but in the realm of spirit where all hearts are connected, he could hear the song of peace being carried forward by countless souls. Children singing lullabies their grandmothers had taught them, young people making vows of love and commitment, elders sharing stories of healing and hope, all of it weaving together into a harmony more beautiful than any earthly music. And in that moment, Hiawatha understood the deepest truth of all, that peace is not something we create, but something we discover. It has always existed, waiting patiently within every heart, behind every conflict, beneath every fear. The voices in the forest had not brought him something new, but had simply helped him remember what he had always known. As his consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of individual identity, Hiawatha became one with the eternal song of peace. His story merged with all stories. His voice joined the cosmic chorus. His love became part of a love that moved the sun and stars. The grove fell silent, but it was a profound silence of completion, of perfect peace, of a soul returning home to the source from which it came. And in that silence, other seekers would come. Other hearts would hear the ancient voices calling. Other lives would be transformed by the eternal wisdom that waits patiently in the deep places of the world, ready to speak to any who have the courage to listen. And so, dear listener, our story draws to its close, but like all true stories, it has no real ending. The voices that called to Hiawatha in the forest still whisper in the wind. The tree of peace still offers shelter to all who seek it. The seeds of compassion still wait in every heart to be awakened by love. Perhaps, in your own quiet moments, you too have heard something calling from the depths of silence. Perhaps you too have felt the stirring of ancient wisdom, the gentle invitation to become more than you thought possible. Perhaps you too are being called to be a bridge, a peacemaker, a voice of healing in a world that so desperately needs what you have to offer.